Members of the gallery, you are aware that these meetings are online. They are, thank you.
You're not on camera. You're not on camera. It's meant to be two.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of Glamorgan Spring Bay Council held on Tuesday, the 22nd of August, 2023. I declare the meeting open at 2:01 p.m. Glamorgan Spring Bay Council acknowledge and pays respects to the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional owners and continuing custodians of this land on which we gather, and acknowledge their elders past and present. Agenda item 1.2 is present. Present today, we have the Deputy Mayor Michael Simons, Councillor Jenny Woods, Councillor Robert Young, Councillor Rob Churchill, Councillor Neil Edwards and Councillor Carol McQueenie. We have no apologies. Councillor Greg Luck is on extended leave of absence. In attendance today, we have the General Manager, Mr. Greg Ingham, the Director of Works and Infrastructure, Mr. Peter Porch, the Director of Planning and Development, Mr. Alex Woodward, the Senior Planner, Mr. James Bonner, our Planning Consultant, Mr. McPurvis, our Executive Officer, Ms. Jasmine Kerr, Mrs. Jasmine Kerr, and Ms. Eliza Hazelwood. General Manager, do we have any late reports at 1.5?
No late reports, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Agenda item 1.6, declaration of interest or conflict. As Mayor and as Chair, I request elected members to indicate whether they have any interest personally or via a close associate as defined in section 49 of the Local Government Act, or any conflict as described in Council's Code of Conduct for councillors in any item included in the agenda. As Mayor, I'm declaring a conflict, a close associate conflict in agenda item 4.1. And I will leave the chamber. Thank you. Agenda item 2 is the ordinary meeting of council, the 25th of July, 2023. There is a recommendation on page 6. Deputy Mayor, thank you.
I'll move that the minutes of the ordinary meeting of council held on the 25th of July 2023 at 2 p.m. be confirmed as a true and correct record.
Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor McQueenie, thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Motion is carried. Thank you. Agenda item 2.2 is the date and purpose of workshops held. There is a recommendation on page 8. Councillor Woods, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll note, move that council notes the information.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Churchill, thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Motion is carried. Agenda item 3 is public question time. 3.1 is questions on notice. There were none. Agenda item 3.2 is questions without notice. Just prior to going to that, General Manager, it was remiss of me not to mention that we have in attendance, we have 5 members of the public in the gallery. So I just want to note that here. So General Manager, there are no questions on notice. Do we have any questions without notice?
Yes, Madam Mayor, we do have questions without notice from there's 2, 4, 6, 7 questions from 4 persons. So I just want to note too that 2 of those persons are in the gallery, Mr. Lance Howard and Mr. Ross Hugo. All the questions relate to item 4.1, which is the 1100 Coles Bay Road.
Thank you. Thank you, General Manager. As I have declared a close associate conflict in this, I will now ask the Deputy Mayor to chair the meeting for agenda item 3.2 and agenda item 4.1. Thank you, and I will leave the chamber. Thank you.
So if I can just read them.
Yeah, if you'd like to go ahead and read the questions.
So as per our standard practice, the questions are read verbatim. So apologies for any grammar errors in the questions, but starting with Dr. Elizabeth Gray. As I said in the beginning, all these questions relate to item 4.1 on the agenda today. Dr. Elizabeth Gray, in the event of approval of DA 2023/00055, 1100 Coles Bay Road, commercial development that would situate merely 15 metres from Maltine Lagoon, how will Glamorgan Spring Bay Council protect their Ramsar wetlands, in brackets, Maltine Lagoon and Apsley marshes, from close brackets, from encroachment and development in the future? A response will be provided to that question in the September ordinary meeting agenda, as well as to the individual themselves. Question from Lance Howard, who, as I said, is in the gallery with us today. 2 questions from Lance Howard. Question 1, in relation to the application at 1100 Coles Bay Road, assess the following question. Council has been made aware of such the likelihood of serious environmental harm and blatant issues with the application, but fails to request further information or seek an environmental impact assessment. How has Council determined that there will be no impact on Ramsar site and its ecological values as stated by the planning team in the assessment? Question 2 from Mr. Howard. Further to this, now Council is fully aware of the possible impact to ecological values of land within 20 metres of the development being Maltine Lagoon. Is Council comfortable that under the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act and Council's and Australians' obligations under the International Ramsar Treaty, that Council has no obligations to prevent impact and that no liability will fall onto Council for possible breaches of the above legislation? Ross Hugo, Mr. Hugo's in the gallery with us today, also asked 2 questions. The first one, would Council be prepared to create a Glamorgan Spring Bay particular purpose zone and a Glamorgan Spring Bay specific area plans, specific purpose area for the Maltine Lagoon area? This is to prevent large-scale development so close to one of the most ecological sensitive areas in the council area. There appears to be good plans to protect the tourist industry and commercial development, but very little to protect cultural usage and environmental values of such sensitive areas. Question 2 from Mr. Hugo. We also seek answers, Council's involvement in the removal, open brackets, without following development application processes, close brackets, of culturally sensitive structures adjacent to 1100 Coles Bay Road, Coles Bay, with no consultation with the owners. Given we believe these activities and structures are covered under the Maltine Lagoon Conservation Plan 2003. Finally, questions from Mr. Rod Wilson. Mr. Wilson asked 2 questions. The absolute protection and well-being of the Maltine Lagoon Ramsar site that joins this site on its western boundary is of extreme concern to me if the development application for this site is approved by Council. My question is, can Glamorgan Spring Bay Council guarantee, without exception, that Maltine Lagoon will not be contaminated or have its biodiversity affected or impacted in any way due to the approval of this development application? The second question from Mr. Wilson. Given that specific aspects of this development application, particularly the demolition of the shacks and much of the earthworks, have already been completed prior to approval on the basis of utilizing a previous DA for a vineyard that does not exist, my question is, should we be trusting this developer to comply with any future directives? That's the end of the questions without notice. And as I said, all of those responses will be provided in writing and included in the September ordinary council meeting agenda.
Thank you, General Manager. Item 4 on the agenda is the Planning Authority section, under Regulation 25 of the Local Government Meeting Procedures Regulations 2015. The chairperson hereby declares that the council is now acting as a planning authority under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993 for sections 4 of the agenda. Can I have a recommendation, please? Yes, councillor.
Deputy Mayor, I move that the council now act as a planning authority at 2:10 p.m.
And the seconder, councillor Woods. Pardon. And all those in favour? Thank you. The first item for consideration is item 4.1 DA 2023/00055 1100 Coles Bay Road, Coles Bay, consisting of a visitor accommodation, cafe, cellar, door and dwelling. For councillors, there is a recommendation on page 26. And would anyone like to move a motion? Councillor Churchill.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Acting Mayor, thank you. I move that pursuant to section 57 of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993 and the Tasmanian Planning Scheme, Glamorgan Spring Bay, DA 2023/00055 at 1100 Coles Bay Road, Coles Bay, CT 125767/1 for 8 visitor accommodation cabins, cafe, cellar door and dwelling be refused for the following reasons. That the application has not demonstrated that the visitor accommodation use is required for operational reasons to be located within the rural location, having regard to clause 20.3.1 P1 A, B, C, D and E. That the discretionary uses will not confine or restrain existing uses on the adjoining Malting Lagoon, having regard to clause 20.3.1 P2 A, B, C and E. And that the visitor accommodation is appropriate for the rural location, having regard to clause 20.3.1 P3 A, C and E. And the proposed development will avoid or minimise adverse impacts on Malting Lagoon, having regard to clause C7.6.1 A, B, J, L, M and N of the Natural Assets Code.
Thank you, councillor Churchill. Would anyone like to second that motion? Councillor McQueenie as the seconder, thank you. And if I could just note for our executive officer, do you have the details as that is different to the recommendation in the agenda? Thank you. Would you like to speak to your motion, councillor Churchill?
Yes, I would, thank you. It appears that the agricultural use, a vineyard, is being used to validate the development of visitor accommodation at 1100 Coles Bay Road. It is reasonable to argue that there is no actual vineyard despite its approval in 2015. Perhaps that is to do with the lack of water availability and soil types. The scenic road corridor extending 100 metres from Coles Bay to the west is encroached upon by the proposed cellar door and its adjacent car park. Arguably the best view of Malting Lagoon from Coles Bay Road. I would add that any interruption of that view all the way to the lagoon would have a negative impact on the scenic beauty enjoyed by local residents and visitors alike. Malting Lagoon, a Ramsar wetland, has a coastal protection area of 100 metres from the boundary of the reserve. Protecting Malting Lagoon should be of paramount importance to all concerned, including the developer. The report relating to the traffic entrance from Coles Bay Road is substantial, in the order of 100 pages. This report is required and important. Of great importance also is the environment, so close to the Ramsar wetland of Malting Lagoon. This proposal has the potential to have significant and possibly irreversible impacts on the natural values of the lagoon and its surrounds. The Planning Authority has not been provided with qualified reports concerning impacts on flora, fauna, soil and water. And I believe we have a responsibility to protect our special environments and to try to maintain them for future generations, and also to attract tourists to this special place. Increasing human interference with vegetation and wildlife close to Malting Lagoon would have lasting detrimental consequences in terms of the breeding and feeding environments for native wildlife and the survival of plant species, some of which are listed as being endangered. It is possible that there are species in this area, such as the propeller plant, a species endemic to Tasmania, with much of its habitat on the east coast. Remnant populations such as this need to be identified, protected, and preserved for the future. Acid sulfate soils are of significance in this area, with overlays over almost the entire development site and immediately adjacent to the west adjoining Malting Lagoon. Acid sulfate soils are a bit like asbestos in the sense that they will have no negative impact until they are disturbed, as may happen with the potential construction process. Cultural heritage sites are a likely finding in such locations near the lagoon. The home and hunting ground of Aboriginal people for 40,000 years, who is surprised? It would be useful to have a cultural heritage report to inform the Planning Authority. Hunting and the interface with residents and visitors, I'll leave that for others to discuss. This site being long and narrow, at its widest approximately 170 metres, is for the most part probably in the scenic corridor, 100 metres from the eastern boundary, or the coastal protection area, 100 metres from the western boundary, or both. And it is mostly covered by acid soil overlays. Clearly, this is a vulnerable environment and, in my view, one we must protect. The Planning Authority has not been presented with strong and convincing evidence to support this development application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Churchill. As the seconder, Councillor McQueenie, would you like to make comment?
I don't think I can add more to what Councillor Churchill said.
Thank you. Would any councillors like to speak for the motion? Would any councillors like to speak against the motion? Councillor Young.
Deputy Mayor, my reasons to vote against this motion include the fact that if one looks carefully at the development application and the material filed in support of it, it should fail on its own face. The development application involves an incursion into the scenic corridor, which is an important matter to consider. And if we were to consider it favourably, the development application, it would require the exercise of a discretion. I note that the soil is acid sulfate, that some years ago approval was given for a vineyard and a dwelling. A start was made on the vineyard, at least some structural posts and others were set up. The dwelling was not proceeded with. I looked at the question of acid sulfate soil. It's most unsuitable for grape growing. It causes the roots of the vines to ball and they won't spread properly. And with the result that any grapes that do grow are going to be dwarfed and of very little value to a genuine vinologist. The vineyard was started by a former owner, but if anything was planted, it appears not to have survived. The dwelling was not proceeded with. If the soil was not adversely affected by, if the grapes were not adversely affected by the soil, one would wonder why the vineyard was not proceeded with. If the soil was unsuitable, one could understand why the vineyard was not proceeded with. No doubt the dwelling was not constructed as the vineyard planting was not occurring, and therefore the dwelling was not needed. And there are examples in Bichonneau, for instance, of approvals given yet not proceeded with, and other approvals given on top of the same ground, hopefully proceeded with, but they may not have. It's a while since I've been up to have a look. So it's not unusual for two development applications to be dealt with in respect of the same land. Now, as I understand it, the earlier development application was partially started, the development part, namely the putting of some posts and other things in for the vineyard, but it didn't proceed. And even though the earlier development application didn't proceed, the dwelling is not going to proceed because the development application considered, or part of the application today, the earlier development application for a house is not proceeded with, and one would assume that it's obviously abandoned. And probably one, from a practical point of view, the vineyard is not proceeding because it's being abandoned. The property was sold and then this development application occurred. Now, for a matter to be abandoned, you do not have to apply to council to get a permit to abandon something you decide not to proceed with. This application, if there was no vineyard proceeded with at all, would merely be a development application for holiday flats and a dwelling that run into the scenic corridor, that intrude, if not directly, but substantially in effect to a sensitive ecological area. These flats are well away from any zoned holiday, residential or township area. And we're asked to exercise our discretion to approve cabins, otherwise units, with no guarantee that any grapes or vineyards would ever be planted. It seems to me, as a matter of common sense, it's improbable they'll ever be planted because of the soil troubles. And I've heard today, not direct from the developer, but I've heard the developer has no intention of planting any grapes. So my surmise in dealing with this before I heard of this fact, I'm sure is correct. Because this development application is most probably an application for holiday units and not cabins associated with the use of an adjacent vineyard. And it's outside the normal zoned area for these sorts of things. If there wasn't an agricultural use that matched and was being carried out, if we approve this development application, it would in fact be approving something that is not zoned for in this area. So for these additional reasons, I propose to vote against this, the approval of this motion, sorry, of this development.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Have any other councillors want to make some comment? Councillor Woods, thank you.
Yeah, I won't be, everything that I've been thinking about has been said. What I struggle with is why developments like this are brought to the planning authority when they are at a sensitive area to the coast. And why aren't the developers even a little bit more sensitive to the Ramsar wetlands? I do struggle with wanting to support, the tourism industry and business and the like. However, I can't support something like this with the significance of the area.
Thank you,
Thank you.
councillor Woods. I'm not sure if it's appropriate for our planner to respond. If he wishes to make any comment, no, that's fine. That's fine. Any other councillors wish to comment? If that's the case, then we'll put the motion. Oh, sorry, would councillor Churchill, would you like to close debate?
I'm happy I've said all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. So I put the vote forward. All those in favour?
It's a new motion.
Yeah, the new motion. That's a unanimous decision. So that motion is carried. Thank you. Mayor Arnold could be brought back in.
So Deputy Mayor. Deputy Mayor, the effect of it is that the development application is refused.
That's correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
You're welcome. Madam Mayor, just for your information, a new motion was put, which is on the board there, and that motion will carry
Thank you.
to not approve the
Thank you.
development unanimously.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you very much for chairing that section of the meeting. We'll now move to agenda item 4.2, which is the draft amendment 2023-01. There is a recommendation on page 38.
Bringing in everyone.
Councillor Woods,
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that pursuant to section 40K and 42 of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, the Planning Authority endorse attachment 4 40K report, draft amended AM 2023-01 V1.1 as its report on AM 2023-01 in accordance with sections 40K2 and 42 of the Act, and 2, recommend to the Tasmanian Planning Commission that AM 2023-01 be modified to establish an overlay for the attenuation buffer for the Orford Sewerage Treatment Plant based on the attenuation report provided as part of the application and terminated at the southern boundary of Reben Road, and 3, recommend to the Tasmanian Planning Commission that condition 3 of the draft planning permit AM 2023-01 be amended as follows. The POS shown on the lot layout plan must be set aside for drainage on the final plan when submitted.
Thank you, Councillor Woods. Do I have a seconder? Is there a seconder? Councillor Edwards, thank you. Councillor Woods, do you wish to speak to the motion or
Not
close
at this
debate?
stage, I'd rather close back. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker for the motion, speaker against the motion. Councillor McQueenie.
Thanks, Nan.
Councillor McQueenie, I might ask, I have to ask you to take the microphone closer to you. Thank you.
Sure. First of all, I'd like to note not only the range, does this all the time, range of representations that have been submitted regarding this proposed development, but also the quality and professional expertise that underpins those representations, including engineering, planning, etc. expertise. I'm not anti-development, but I do think that we have a responsibility of good planning and sound planning decisions. And I also, in that context, note that the representations in the large are not suggesting there be no development, but raise an overwhelming, repeatedly, issues such as sewerage, stormwater, and the premises that underline this being the site for significant growth alone that underpin this recommendation. Before I go into these details in further detail, I also want to comment that while there has been a compilation of many issues in the report, there are a range of questions that have been asked in the representation or data presented that I do not see clear consideration of, which I think compromises the explanation and the premises that underpin the recommendation. To go into the items in detail, attenuation barriers have been repeatedly raised. And it would seem to me, from my understanding, that we're essentially faced with an inconvenient truth. We know that the EPA has said that the development doesn't meet attenuation distance from sewage treatment plants. And what are those distances? And here I'm relying upon some published materials from TasWater, Tas Planning Scheme information, and also items as part of the application for the detail that follows. The Tas Planning Scheme details attenuation distances from sewage treatment plants in Table 9.2. If a plant of Orford's type remains below 275 kilolitres a day in volume, then the buffer, attenuation buffer, is set at 150 metres. Anything above 275, the buffer extends to 350 in the planning scheme table. So the 275 figure is critical given the current advisements. In the SEAM report that underpins part of the application, they suggest that there's a daily rate of 179 kilolitres currently, some 100 kilolitres less than the 275 threshold. And I'm sorry about the detail here, but it becomes really important. But when you look at TasWater's own current published last annual average a month, it's actually not 275, but it's 280 already. So we've already hit the requirement around a move from a smaller to a larger attenuation buffer. So it would appear that if we wish to establish or accept that we want a 150 buffer, which is something close to the southern boundary of Rebben Road, then development is necessarily impacted because we've already reached an attenuation buffer distance larger than that. Not only for this application, but for any application that comes into Orford that's serviced by the sewerage system. So if we wish to support further development, then we necessarily, unless we wish to ignore what's accepted attenuation distances, need to accept the provided attenuation buffer distance of 350 based on TasWater's own reported, and particularly when the plant itself's capacity ultimately is published by TasWater as over 400,000. So it's been built for further development. I fail to see on what basis we would support less than what's accepted as acceptable for our community. In fact, it would be on doubling or reducing by more than 50% what would be acceptable. Another key issue is stormwater, and the location is well known for flooding onto a range of adjoining properties to that particular area, and they're not 1 in 100 floods. They're very regular, involving SES assistance at the time, wood piles flowing through properties. Water is key in the area. The proponent's report, the FLUSIG, and I may have got that pronunciation wrong, so forgive me, states that the post-development model does increase the cumulative net discharge inside the existing watercourse, an increase of approximately 23%, and results in an extra 2.87 or nearly 3 tonnes of water per second rushing down the short distance of 50 metres in the narrow open creek onto East Shelley Beach. There isn't an opportunity to pop in ponds or other things to mitigate that flow because of the distance between this development.
Councillor McQueenie, if I could interrupt you
Yep.
there, our meeting procedures allow a 5-minute speaking time.
Yep.
I am prepared to extend it because very clearly you've done quite a lot of research around it.
Yep.
But I can only extend it for 2 minutes.
Sure, thank you. Yeah. Sorry, now I'm just finding my place again.
Sorry.
So it would seem that the stormwater design increase outlined in the report and the net discharge of stormwater from pre-development levels is in violation of the draft permit conditions. This, along with other questions asked or information put forward in the representation, was not addressed in the report. The development, the final thing I'll say briefly is the assumptions or premises that underpin this, as I read it and as in the report, representations, etc., is that this site is critical to meeting growth. When you look at the ABS data, for the last 10 years, from 2012 to now, we now have the benefit of pre-COVID, COVID and post-COVID population data. We have a 1.6 average published by the ABS and RemLink or repeated each year. We have, I would assume, a fairly curious position where the soulless developers or people who are involved in that are actually asking why the assumption is that it's the only place that's being developed when they are progressing development around Solus. In fact, we considered related materials at 2 meetings ago. So for me, there's a range of things that relate to the growth strategy too that remain unanswered as to why we are suggesting that this particular site should be the bank for growth when, yes, we need a new structure plan, but Orford and Triabunna 10 years later from the last structure plan is a different picture than it was when we based our first structure plan. Thank you. So I obviously have deep concerns about.
Councillor McQueenie, do you wish the senior planner or Mr. Purvis to make a comment on this, on anything that you've raised?
Not if I'm not allowed to talk further.
Sorry?
Not if I'm not allowed the opportunity to talk further.
I can, well, you've still got 41 seconds on this and I can make an exception and give you on this time, and I can make an exception in this exceptional circumstances and give you some extra time if you wish.
I'm certainly interested in why we would be suggesting a reduced attenuation buffer outside of what the actual planning scheme suggests, given the published actuals around.
So how much more time do you think you'd need to speak to it?
Depend on
To Mr. Purvis, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, so in our assessment, we used the 350 metre buffer. We didn't rely on the lower figure because the EPA approval for the Orford sewage treatment plant is to, I think from memory, 460 kilolitres. So under table C 9.2 of the Tasmanian planning scheme, 350 metres is the appropriate buffer.
Sorry, can I just clarify that, Mr. Purvis? You're saying that the buffer is 350 metres?
Yes, that's the
yes.
advice that TasWater gave us for this process.
Yep.
It
And
is
we have
350.
that buffer in place?
Yes, we do.
Yes. So not 150 metres that Councillor McQueenie was alluding to?
That's correct.
doesn't cross the southern boundary of Ribbon Road.
So just let me go to a different document so I can answer that question. Page 230 of the attachments to this agenda shows figure 3 at the top of the page. The 350 metre buffer under
Sorry.
both
Page number, sorry, apologies.
page 230
Yep.
of the attachments. And that shows the 350 metre buffer taken on the left-hand side under the interim planning scheme from the actual activity with the wastewater treatment plant. And on the right-hand side, as required by the Tasmanian planning scheme from the title boundaries of the property. Now, the change from the interim to the Tasmanian planning scheme means there's 39 existing residentially zoned properties that have been included in that buffer that were not previously included, which is why there's a difference between the red boundary shown on the left-hand side and the shaded area shown on the right-hand side. That was something we had no say in. That was one of the changes required by the Tasmanian planning scheme because it changed attenuation buffers from the specific activity and the approval that was issued for it to the title boundaries. Now, the title boundaries for this property include the access driveway from Reuben Road, which is why there are those additional properties now included within the buffer. So part 2 of the recommendation that was, we have expert advice from TasWater in saying that they support the various reports provided by the applicant that provide a specific assessment of the impacts of this site. Now, one of the reports, the seam attenuation report, includes a windrow that shows the dominant wind directions for the Orford sewage treatment plant are blowing from the east to the west and southwest. So TasWater, in their advice and in their specific response to these very questions, provided the submission notice to the planning authority, which was their approval document for the original subdivision when we considered that a couple of months ago. And then they provided additional comments as reported in the attachments or in the 40K report in this attachment that supported the specialist assessments
Can I
that were
stop you there
provided.
because we're coming through, may I, a range of questions. So this same report that they accepted is the same one which was 100 kilolitres, nearly 50% below the actuals?
That was reporting on actual flow figures and not the approval limit from the EPA.
Yeah, so the actual from TasWater is 281 and SEAM said 170. And you're now saying TasWater, who published 281, endorsed SEAM's information, which was actually 100 less than their reported actuals as actual.
TasWater's environmental reporting for this particular site, which was referred to in the representation from All Urban Planning, included a range of flows which varied across the year. The SEAM report was talking from memory. The SEAM report was talking about the actual flows at the time when they did their inspection.
Right, so presumably we would rely on TasWater's reported actuals, not somebody who on a certain date put forward an actual, because the reported actuals for TasWater are monthly across the entire year with an average at the end of 281. So I would have thought we would count that information directly from the horse's mouth and reporting system as having more veracity and being more reliable than a report that's demonstrably lower than the actuals as what we would accept as flows. Can I also ask the
Councillor
boundary?
McQueenie, Councillor McQueenie, yeah, Councillor McQueenie, in this session, I fully appreciate that this matter is very important and there is a large number of representations. Meeting procedures, though, do not allow debate in this session. I can only allow you to ask questions, not debate the matter with Mr. Purvis, and allow him to respond.
Hopefully that point's been made without needing to ask a further question.
Yeah.
about the reliability of
But
different
Mr.
data.
Purvis, I would like Mr. Purvis to respond to that last comment that you made, or last question that you made.
So my reading of the SEAM report was reporting the figures when they attended the site. The Taswater environmental reporting and the Taswater advice confirms that those figures range throughout the year. Now, the fact that Taswater has supported the environmental report tells me that they have actually considered the full range of flow reporting across the year and the various figures. If they hadn't considered that, there would be a question about their support for the application. They provided support with the original assessment and the issue of their submission notice to the Planning Authority, and then they provided additional support or restated that support when we went back to them and asked them to confirm their previous assessment and the data that supported the SEAM assessment and the attenuation areas.
Okay, so if I may, that for the entire 2021-2 period, no month by TAS reporters average by month, no month was less than 209.
Councillor
The
McQueenie,
highest was 414. Can I just ask my understanding of the boundary? Where, am I right in thinking that the boundary, southern boundary of Revon Road is the road that runs through these shaded areas?
Yes, that's correct.
So in saying that should be an attenuation boundary, the left-hand side one, half of those properties in that development, or approximately half, will be within the attenuation buffer area.
Yes, but you have to read those two diagrams together. The left-hand side is the buffer that applied under the interim planning scheme.
Yep.
The right-hand side is the buffer that includes the access driveway.
So the right-hand side is in fact probably more like 4/5 of the property in that area will actually sit within an attenuation buffer area.
That is correct. And an additional 39 existing properties in the general residential zone.
So I would just ask, is it good, and I'm not asking you, thank you for your responses, if we can seriously hand on heart think that approving something where 80% of the properties sit within an attenuation buffer zone that isn't going to change is good planning.
Mr. Purvis.
That is why item 2 of the recommendation supports mapping the attenuation buffer for that particular plant and cutting that attenuation based on the expert advice and the Taswater support on the southern side of Revon Road. What that means is future property developers, purchasers, people who build houses in this subdivision and those other existing vacant lots will not have to get an attenuation report based on the professional advice that Taswater has supported.
So administratively, it's different, but those properties still sit 80% of them within.
I'm sorry,
buffer
Councillor.
zone.
I'm sorry, Councillor McQueenie. We've had this conversation before in terms of my hearing.
Yeah, sorry.
And when you bang the desk,
Oh,
for want of a better term, it does affect what I can actually hear you saying. I'm
Yep.
sorry. And as the chair of the meeting, it makes it incredibly hard for me.
So I appreciate that in what you're saying. I think, Ms. Purvis, is that there won't be a need for a report if we move the attenuation buffer boundary. And I'm not sure if I'm one of the 80% who are sitting there that would think that not having to get a attenuation report is actually good planning for that area. In fact, I think it undermines essentially what this planning's about.
If I may, to Mr. Purvis, through you, General Manager, if I may direct to Mr. Purvis. Condition 2 protects the properties. I mean, with the attenuation buffer, is that, I mean, I'm just, I'm not going to kid you, I'm just a wee bit confused about all of this at the moment.
I can appreciate that. Is this thing working?
Yes, it is.
Thank
Yes.
you. So recommendation 2 proposes that we map that boundary, that attenuation area, because it's not mapped at the moment.
That's what I read it as. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Any other, now, councillor Edwards, I think you were next after councillor McQueenie, then councillor Woods. No, you want to close debate, councillor Woods. Councillor Edwards, thank you.
Whilst I greatly sympathise with a lot of the respondents, I look at it slightly differently. I look at it as far as if Taswater engineers and our own planning experts tell us that this is, and not only our own experts, but Taswater experts tell us that the water and the sewage is okay, even though I have huge doubts about the water supply. But at the end of the day, it's not our remit. That is their problem, not ours. If we run out of water, they've got to fix it. So as Councillor Simon said once, until they ran out in Bicheno, nothing was done. So I think we need to worry about things which are in our remit and we can worry about. Now, the way I look at it is if we go into the rural residential side of things, we end up with a Happy Valley Road where blocks have already been strata titled and split. Strawberry Hills Court, which was sold as can never be split. That's only 10 years ago. They've been split into 2 and 3 blocks. No infrastructure, no planning, nothing underground already laid and done. So that in itself unleashes a hell of a lot of problems down the track. I think that we had Tassal here the other day saying 17 of their employees travel up every day. We have Springway Mill saying a lot of their staff travel up every day. We have Sea Forest saying the same thing. We need to find somewhere for young families to be able to move to the area and live, move here, put their children in the school, keep the school alive, keep the community alive. Sadly, the big blocks are no longer affordable unless you have generational wealth, and that's a sad thing. It's just a fact. We need to be able to encourage young families, young people to come to the area and keep our community alive, rather than just end up as a retirement village. That's my swing on it, so I'll be supporting that.
Councillor Young.
Madam Mayor, thank you very much. Councillor Edwards has raised some very important points. We do have industry here. We do have people travelling to this municipality to work. They do need a place to live. They do need to have land that's affordable for them to buy, and they do need somewhere other than Hobart or Sorell in which to live. And I don't dispute what he has to say. This question comes to my mind. Is Orford and the Orford area and the holiday area that it is, as opposed to the industrial, relatively closely settled area of Triabunna, the place to rezone holiday style land and occupancy to dense development? One of the attractions of this place is that people come here because of the lifestyle, and they come here for the holiday feel. We heard today about some of the people that we're talking to about structural plans and the attractions of the whole of the East Coast area. And it's a very valid point. Perhaps it should be that part of the lands around the township of Triabunna, which happens also to be closer to many of the factories, be rezoned to enable this development to occur, a development that's needed. Now, Councillor McQueenie went into great detail about attenuation zones. I looked up attenuation in the dictionary. It talks about narrow areas. And it seems to me that the area is getting narrower rather than wider. And it seems to me, from looking at the report from that we've had in support of this application, that Taswater has looked at this area, perhaps in dry times. And just remember, taking an average is not indicative of the extremes that we have suffered over the last few years, last 3 years, extremes. And an average is very useful. But remember, if your left foot is in a bucket of dry ice and your right foot is on the hot plate, on the average, you're comfortable. So averages are not necessarily things that should be properly considered. The extremes with the water coming through your bedroom, as I've had twice in the last 10 years, the extremes are things that affect you. And I don't live or have a place at East or West Shelley Beach, so I don't have to take a deep breath of fresh air with it contaminated by the hydrogens and the methanes and other things that come out of the very necessary sewage treatment ponds, if we call them for what they are. I think this is not the place for this particular rezoning to occur. There are other places more appropriate that could become the closely settled suburbs of a Hobart-style environment than Orford, or Swansea, or Bicheno, or Coles Bay. There are other areas. This is not the place for it, in spite of the very eloquent and viable and justifiable comments made by Councillor Edwards about the need for people working in our municipality to be able to buy a place here and live here. So I won't be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Young. We have no specific questions for Mr. Purvis.
No,
thank
he's
you.
done a very good report. Just I don't agree with the conclusion of it.
Councillor.
Councillor Churchill.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just before I say my piece, I just have one question, if I could perhaps ask the planner through you. Is there a stormwater management report provided to the council by the developer?
Yes, there is.
Thank you. That is definite. Thank you. Okay, good. All right, thank you for that. Look, we all view this thing in different ways. And I share a lot of the concerns in the room, and quite clearly, Councillor McQueenie has put a lot of work into and understands the attenuation issues far better than I do. What are we actually dealing with here? I look at it in another way. I look at it that what we're trying to do here is to develop a relatively high density residential development in what we know is a flood prone area located close to a sewerage works with the problems associated or potential problems associated with that. Now, while we've got people telling us that it's all about wind flows and the like, I'm reading expert evidence, what I think it's expert evidence, coming from some of the amazing reports that have been put in as representations, talking about it's actually a lot of the worst effects of the odours, if you like, from that sewage treatment work is in fact when there is no wind movement. So we're hearing a whole lot of different things here, but I really struggle with why we would be trying to actually have a higher density development on this site as well. We would have, in my view, and I haven't been given a reason not to, but in my view, I can't see why we couldn't be going for low density residential zoning. That would still allow it to be developed, albeit with larger blocks. How about we can have more spaces for more vegetation, all those sorts of things. I might be able to, I'd have to see it, but that might be something that I could support. There are a lot of issues. There are a lot of issues here that are very, very complicated. I do want to strongly acknowledge the expertise of many of these representations, the expertise and the knowledge behind them is to be read and respected. And it's good that if and when this goes to the TPC, which it ultimately will, that those representations go there and they will, I believe, receive respectful consideration by the TPC. And I think this, I've seen a lot of representations in my 5 years on council, believe me, and a lot more than I've wanted to. And these stand out as some of the best that I have ever seen. And I think I've even heard our planner make a similar comment around that. So I struggle most with part 2 of this recommendation, and I can't support the motion. I'd also like to, if I may, remind councillors that through this process, we do have the right to change our opinion from what our position was when this was first brought to us, having given consideration to the representations and further information that we've been given. That is the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there
So
any
my
other
side.
speakers? Deputy Mayor, did you? No.
You can have a comment or
Yes, I will allow
I was-
it. Given the enormity of this particular matter, councillor Edwards, yes.
there was two things. Just I remember from one of our workshops that Mr. Porch said that the stormwater work which was being asked for the proponent to do would actually improve the flooding, make the flooding less than it currently is. That's correct, Mr. Porch, yes. And also, I just have you have a quick look at the map. They talk about, high density. Along East Shelley Beach Road, there's 1, 2, 3, 5 blocks, and there's proposed to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 backing onto it. It's not a massive difference. And the other one, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 blocks, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 backing onto that. Now they're large blocks, the East Shelley blocks. A lot of these blocks here are 700, 800, 900 square meters, 1100 square meters. The average size would be 700 to 800 square meters. It's not like they're building battery hens. So I think that it's a bit of a fear factor. Having lived in East Shelley and probably live closest to the sewage works now than anyone probably. You might be closer. I've never smelled it once, but
I am.
maybe I've got bad smell.
Been smoking.
Thank you.
Not smoke.
Deputy Mayor, did you wish to speak?
No,
No,
everything's
you're
been said.
right. Okay.
Well said. Thank you.
So before I go to you, councillor Woods, to close, there's just a couple of things I'd like to say. Councillor Churchill made a really good point about this going to the TPC and the representations being respected by the TPC. I think that's something that we all need to take account of. I know as part of this process, council themselves have received some significant expert opinions on various things. So my personal view is that I will support the motion to send it to TPC. Councillor Woods, would you like to close debate?
Most certainly, thank you. And I do appreciate the comments around the table by everyone. And I'm going to sound like a broken record. You all know what that is.
Water.
Water. I know it's not our remit to be concerned about that with regards to water and or sewerage because it falls in TasWater's remit. But we are the ones that are going to cop it in the neck when things go wrong. Not TasWater, we cop it. And we're the ones that are answerable to our residents and our ratepayers, and because we're voted into this position to make sometimes difficult and challenging decisions. there are other developments around within our municipal area that haven't even started, there's, well, there was supposed to be 300 lots at, back in the day at Louisville, East Coaster, Solace. I really struggle with the way the reports come in that is always the same. Taswater say the water is going to be fine. The sewage systems are going to be fine. And yet there's been no no more work done on these infrastructures since they were actually being put in there. What does an attenuation mean? Like, what is it? Is that just an area for smell? Is it?
No, it's a narrowing. Attenuation means slim. I looked it up this morning.
But the attenuation buffer is
Says
meant to
cinder.
protect against
Oh,
smells, etc.
right.
So
Okay. Well,
Therefore,
it doesn't work.
80% sit there in the smelly zone.
You know, like when Taswater come to the table and say they're going to improve our dam or give us another dam, I might start thinking more favourably on, and I'm sick and tired of not having to, but we do get good reports and nothing against our staff and or expert advice, nothing against them at all. But I'm getting tired of getting reports coming to us to say, approve, 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 when we've got nothing solid with regards to our infrastructure improvements. You know, that's where I sit with it. I will not be supporting this today simply because I don't think that I can barely face our constituents in the street when we run out of water. We've got huge buildings, huge developments going on until that happens and I'm still in the chair, I won't be supporting anymore. Madam Mayor, I urge you now to put the vote.
I will. Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Edwards, Deputy Mayor and Mayor Arnold. Those against? Those against Councillor Churchill, Councillor Young, Councillor Woods and Councillor McQueenie. The motion is lost. I need to seek some guidance here from staff in that we are in planning authority and I don't believe that we can just stop at lost. So I need to seek some advice from we have a statutory time frame to do this, I believe, Mr. Woodward. So
through you, Mayor, we do have a statutory time frame. So we can go to the Commission and ask for an extension, a further extension for it to be reconsidered or an alternate motion passed. Alternatively, if council wishes to put an alternate motion, it could do at today's meeting. However, that may require some discussion.
I'm sorry,
However,
however,
it may require some discussion and you may not have the information in front of you for that.
all right.
Madam Mayor, I'd ask for an adjournment for 10 minutes so we can discuss the matter without being on air, just informally, to see if we can put a motion that might be able to be passed today and satisfy everyone to a limited degree and thus deal with this matter today. It'll be a 10-minute adjournment. I've got a couple of suggestions. We might have to ask the audience to walk out for a few minutes.
Councillor Young, I think that's probably a very good suggestion, particularly as we are in planning authority and we do need to make a decision around this given the statutory timeframes that we're facing. So as chair, I will adjourn the meeting until 3:25, which is approximately 15 minutes, to seek further advice on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam.